everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Roster Reconstruction podcast. It is the unholy trinity, the big three. There's so many nicknames, can't even describe them all, but it's myself, Garrett Bugay, and Josh Earl, and Corban Ford. And we are here on the week of a really important date in the NBA calendar, NBA trade deadline. For some, this is the culmination of all of the NBA trade machine mad rages that have gone on, or whatever transaction happy folks you may be. For others, this is, thank goodness, we're over with this and can focus on the basketball. Whatever the case may be, maybe somewhere in between. I've been on both ends of the spectrum, but the three of us here are going to do something a little different. We could easily talk about, what trade should happen, what could happen, who should be moved, and all of that fun stuff. But we're going to go a little bit deeper and go into more underneath the hood, kind of what leads teams to get to the position of, hey, we need to make a trade. And not just, oh yeah, point guard upgrade would be nice, or oh, this guy's a free agent, so he has to go and we can do, like not just the base level reasons that trades are done, but some more of a deeper exploration of some larger kind of thought concepts behind that. And so that's what the three of us will be kind of going into. Should be a fun conversation, definitely an insightful one. But yeah, we'll tie that into this current trade deadline for sure. We'll have, as we call them, case studies and examples that we can then kind of go into. But yeah, really just an interesting discussion on one of the tenets of roster reconstruction. So Josh, Garrett, before we get started on this, how are y'all doing?
Doing well, my friend.
Yeah, doing great. I am. I've already listened to the Dunked On's mock trade deadline, both episodes in their entirety, and so I'm all prepped. I'm ready for the real thing to happen. I'm excited for it.
Oh yes, me too. If the Lakers can get, just kidding, I'm not going to go there today. But let's kind of kick this off. Where do we want to go with the conversation first? I know both of y'all have taken extensive notes, Josh, Garrett, kind of going into this entirety of this concept. So kind of let's break it down.
Yeah, so I think at roster reconstruction, what we try to do is, like Corbin said, look under the hood. And, you're probably seeing a lot of content, whether that be videos, articles, etc., talking about, like, here are potential deals that these teams could do, that they should do. And, like, you could try to play the prediction game, but that's almost always not going to work out. What's more interesting to us is what factors influence whether a team is looking to make a trade at this deadline or not, and what type of trade they might be looking to make. And so there are a couple of different factors. You got the franchise life cycle, the competitive life cycle of a team. You got, like, financial considerations. You've got the treasure chest or the resources. Like, do you have a lot of firsts? Do you not have a lot of firsts? And then there's, like, internal and external pressures. Like, do you have a star player who's maybe, if not publicly pressuring you to make changes, maybe they're internally pressuring you to make changes, or maybe they're just passive aggressively pressuring you to make changes. Or you might have, a fan base that's tired of, losing, and they're really pushing to, like, all right, let's get going, let's get winning. So these are, like, some of the factors, and I think it'd be good to start off talking about the competitive life cycle of an NBA franchise, because that really influences how each team how they set their goals for this season, whether that be the trade deadline, off season, like around the draft, free agency. All that stuff stems from where are we in the competitive life cycle of an NBA team, and where do we want to go?
Yeah, and before we really get into this, I just want to give props to Corbin. Said that both Josh and I do a lot of prep for these shows. I got to give an extra special shout out to what Josh did for us for this episode. And Corbin and I are going to sound a lot more intelligent because of the all of the work that Josh did.
Yes,
but
shucks, guys.
But speaking to that life cycle, Josh separated them in all teams into sort of 6 categories, so I'll go through them here. starting with just being full on in a rebuilding mode. So you're not competitive. You're not a good basketball team. It's about getting high draft picks. It's about, getting young talent in the door and building a culture, those sorts of things. Then you've got sort of your play-in teams, the teams that are fighting to get into the play-in, fighting for those lower playoff seeds. That'll probably be mincemeat in the actual playoffs, but getting to the playoffs gets you extra money, extra gate revenue, all of those sorts of things. And a lot of owners do like to just be able to say that, hey, we made the playoffs, right? And so play-in teams would be the second category. And then we've got playoff teams. So those teams that are more solid top six groups that aren't as much dealing with the play-in stuff. They're more teams that, could maybe make a little bit of noise even in the playoffs and win a round. And are generally considered a little bit of a threat. Then you've got your home court teams, your teams that are vying for one of those top four seeds. And when you get one of those spots, you're more likely to be the favorites in a first round series, and very much a contender to get into a conference finals as well if the matchups break right. Then you've got your contenders, teams that maybe aren't full on favorites to win the whole thing, but teams that have an outside chance if things go well, if things break right, if some other opponents deal with an injury here or there, that you could see them. They have that. I think Daryl Morey talks about you want to have a 5% chance of winning the championship, right? So these kind of contenders would have at least that. And then you've got, of course, your championship level teams. Like the Denver Nuggets, the reigning champs, would be in this category. So I think an interesting thing to talk about, guys, with this is not only where I think objectively these teams are on this category, but also sometimes ownerships in these teams can get a little delusional and not actually have their team in the correct tier that they should be, which leads to oftentimes mistakes at the deadline.
I definitely think that's. Oh, sorry, Dustin.
Go ahead, Corbin.
I'm gonna pass it right off to you in a second here. I definitely think that's one of the more interesting ones for sure, because so many times, you see that, encouraging stretch in April, will make you go, wow, okay, in the off season, I love that stretch. We were like 14-6, and not taking into consideration the context with which the team was 14-6. We're swinging for the fences. We're making a big trade. We're bringing this player in. Contract be danged. Like, it's going to be something to help us get to the next level. It's like, well, were you adequately sure that that's where you were? Or even if you have like a big playoff series, okay, see, this is it. And I harken back to the 2021 Atlanta Hawks. Really encouraging playoffs. And it's like, wow, we've turned the corner. Let me upgrade you. And it's like, not really sure if that is the right move. But you're right. It's a misevaluation of your current status in this NBA life cycle.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before, right? Like, one of the most important things for a franchise to be successful is you have to have a legit, honest appraisal of where you're at. You have to truly, honestly look at your circumstances and say, like, hey, like Atlanta made that Eastern Conference Finals, and then they made a big swing move, and it hasn't worked out over the last 1,200 games. They're at exactly 500. Are they an actual contender that would typically be denoted by a conference finalist? No. We also saw Minnesota do this, where, we got into the playoffs and we maybe like won a game in the first round, and we were like, you know what? We are ready. Let's go get Rudy Gobert, and let's make this huge deal for Rudy Gobert. And it's playing out well now, but like, these are the types of things that teams sometimes do when they think they're ahead of schedule. And then it's not always even just ahead of schedule. Sometimes teams just do not honestly assess themselves. Chicago, for instance, like any honest assessment of Chicago would suggest, like, this is not the best use of um like salary and the core that we're trying to build around to be what we think we are, you know so it's really, really important that you have an honest, sometimes painful self-appraisal of where you stand as a team in this competitive life cycle.
Yeah, and I think Corbin made a great point about like, okay, what if the team right before the trade deadline goes on a nice little streak? You've got to understand the context of that, right? You've got to understand, okay, was this a 10-game homestand that was it against some weak teams? Maybe some opposition players were out on a particular night that they were playing your team. But there's also the challenge of like, even if your team went 10-2 in the last dozen games, that doesn't necessarily mean your team is that level, because even within basketball games, you see teams go on runs and it's a kind of an up and down. I think it's more important to judge on not only individual games, but seasons and actually consider everything. And you can't just say, oh, because we've played better recently, that the stuff that happened at the beginning of the year isn't relevant. It still is. It still very much is.
Yeah, definitely important context there to be sure. So like, do we have any, I mean, we kind of been talking a little bit about, teams misevaluating, the importance of teams kind of knowing, or the dangers of not. Do we have any examples that we want to kind of touch in on, kind of speaking to that, maybe in, regards to this current trade deadline, of teams that have been making moves and based off of small sample size, or maybe not evaluating where they currently stand?
Well, maybe not teams that have fallen prey to this yet, but there
That's
are
fair.
two teams who are currently on a hell of a ride in Cleveland and New York, who, if they're not careful, might fall prey to this and make a move thinking they're in a particular place when, like we said, based on the variability of the regular season schedule, where you based on back to backs and just matchups and injuries and all sorts of stuff, you can have a really good streak, you can also have a really bad streak. And these are two teams right now that are climbing up the charts. They're the hottest songs playing right now. Casey Kasem is like, these are great. Um, but if you're the Knicks and if you're the Cavs right now, how much do you buy into this recent success? And do you then try to make an additional thing happen before the deadline? Or do you try to see if we need to hold off until the offseason?
Well, and I think the fascinating thing about the Cavs in particular is a lot of the recent run happened without Evan Mobley and without Darius Garland, right? So they had this success kind of playing like what the Donovan Mitchell played on with those Jazz teams, where you've got like George Niang at the 4, lots of spacing, Jared Allen kind of in the Rudy Gobert role, right? And you had a lot of success with that. And now you bring Mobley and Garland back into the fold, and you don't really have context yet of like, okay, what is our full complement of players? What is this team? And what does that group of players need? I think, like, based on the recent stuff that's happened, the front office of Cleveland might have a good idea of what a Donovan Mitchell, Jared Allen led Cavs group could use, but not necessarily when you add the complication of Mobley's limited offensive game and shooting, as well as having Garland out there with 2 ball dominant players in the backcourt.
I definitely think that's interesting, because Cleveland, to me, like you said, do you look at the fact that those guys, how much stock do you put in the fact that you have healthy players returning in Mobley, in Garland, looking like, hey, yeah, they've been on a good streak, but they've been on the streak like with those guys be missing, and those guys are technically reinforcements to what they've already done. Do you take like major stock in that in terms of, hey, like we actually are playing well? Like it's not so much fool's gold as much as like we hit a good hot streak, and now our two best guys who've been out for most of the year are now actually back in the picture. Excuse me. Like, I guess what do you look at with that? Because for me, like, if I'm Cleveland, I'm kind of sitting pat. I feel like, at December 15th, the Cavs were what, 13-12, and that's when they had lost both Garland and Mobley for that extended stretch. But then, aside from that, they had a stretch of injuries, a stretch of underwhelming play, really came back and made that work. And yeah, there was some talk at first about whether the Cavs should be proactive and start fielding calls on Donovan Mitchell because he had bypassed signing an extension. He can be an unrestricted free agent 2025. Like all of that is there, and he's eligible to sign a really big extension this upcoming offseason. But like, I don't know. You look at where they are now. You look at how well they played. Ricky Rubio's retirement, the buyout. Now Cleveland has some flexibility to sign two players and still remain under the tax. Like with all these other circumstances, what do you kind of take to put that into play? Because in my mind, like I say Pat, and I maybe see what I can get for like Isaac Okoro and Dean Wade. And I say that because the Cavs don't have a whole lot. Like they can't trade a first. They have 7 seconds, and their roster, they pretty much use their guys. Those are the two guys I would like think about doing. I mean, I get about dealing rather. You have Damian Jones and you have Ty Jerome, but like Ty Jerome's barely played the season. Damian Jones, same. You're not getting anything there. So like, I guess that's more of my like team centric outlook on that from the outside in when you look at them and where they stand right now.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's so much contextual dissonance. Yeah, you like that?
I like that.
Cognitive dissonance and context together. It's good stuff. But like Garrett alluded to, like they played this really successful style, right? Like one of the discussions we often have in basketball discourse is the discussion between like talent level and like synergistic fit, right? Where what we've seen is really successful synergistic fit around Donovan Mitchell and Jarrett Allen. Put 3 shooters around those guys, and you can have this really successful play style. And this is where it gets complicated because you could argue that Mobley and Garland are the second and third best players on this Cavs team in terms of talent, depending on where you rank Jarrett Allen with those two. And so in theory, right, like having those two back is obviously a benefit. You just got your like 2 of your 4 best players back. That's always a good thing, except when what those players maybe struggle with kind of has that dissonance with what has been successful recently. And so what they need to do, and this is why I agree with you, Corban, like if they were to make any sort of move, it'd probably be to solidify some depth. Maybe like move those guys that you mentioned and maybe like a couple of seconds to get like a slight upgrade in bench depth. But like right now, you don't need to make a move because you're currently third in the East. And you can tinker with staggering lineups where you stagger Garland and Mitchell, you stagger Jarrett and Mobley. And for the time being, that should work because both of those guys will probably have minutes restrictions to start off coming back. But you need to kind of get a sense of both heading into the playoffs and how the playoffs play out. Are we best with this 4-man barbershop quartet of talent? Is that like how we reach the pinnacle, or is it maybe better to get what we can for one of these guys and focus more on maximizing a smaller core with a more synergistic fit?
Well, I think the Cavs are an interesting example of this, as well as Corbin, your Lakers are interesting examples of, Josh, and when I was breaking down what Josh gave us in terms of the categories of where these teams are in the life cycle, a lot of that is kind of based on sort of regular season standings. But then there's also things that you have to factor in with, like, for instance, the Cavs last year were a juggernaut of a regular season team and then got absolutely shellacked in the first round by the New York Knicks. So then going into the offseason and going into this trade deadline, for instance, do the Cavs think of themselves more as the team they've been in the regular season or based on what they've done in the postseason? And then the Lakers are kind of the inverse of that, right? Where they, for last year and most of this regular season, have been a pretty average regular season basketball team. And then, but you do have Anthony Davis and LeBron James and that star power and that playoff experience. And of course, they made it to the conference finals last year. So that's the other thing that, again, going back to what Josh said about teams having that internal dialogue and knowing where you are, but that's where it can be challenging as well, is, having that difference between the regular season and postseason performance, and which one then do you consider the true version of yourself?
And that's why it's also important to know when you are. Like, do we actually have to, like, is there, I mentioned earlier, like external or internal pressures that also influence how we approach the timing of this sort of stuff? Since we're the Cavs, like, we don't have to make a move right now. It's not like the Raptors last offseason. It's not like the Raptors this offseason with Pascal and OG, where like these guys are going to become free agents this offseason. You know what I mean? Like, we don't need to make a choice right this second. And if you don't factor in the where we are and the when we are, that's where you sometimes have misguided trades where, okay, this is a clear upgrade, throwback. Dallas, we're crushing it on offense, but our defense has been terrible. Rajon Rondo is available from the Celtics. Obviously, Rajon Rondo should fit in perfectly with our offense. He's a great passer, and he's a really good defensive player. This is a no-brainer, right? Except Rondo's a ball stopper of a playmaker. He's not actually like freely moving the ball around. He's looking for his assists, and that kills the very offensive flow that your team has been successful with. So like, you need to have that good grasp of like, where are we in the life cycle, and also when are we when it comes to the like choice. And that's where these other elements come in that we talked about. So like, what is our financial situation? Obviously, if we're a rebuilding team and we're in the tax or above one of the aprons, that's a no-go. We need to make a move, right? There's no point in us paying this when we're in this situation. You know? What are our resources like? For instance, people talk about Brooklyn, and I don't necessarily agree with this idea, but people talk about, well, since Brooklyn doesn't own outright any of their own firsts until 29, there's no incentive for them to like take a step back competitively because they won't, be outright tanking. Which I think is false, because if it does help you cut salary, if it does like help you restructure your roster in a way that's going to help you be more competitive in the near future, like, you should do that. What do you care if the pick winds up looking better for another team? You already made that deal. But because they don't have their own firsts, and yes, they do have, other people's firsts, but they're a team that they might be more interested in picking up additional picks instead of trying to further get competitive this season. So we might see them try to get future first for guys like Royce O'Neal, Dorian Finney-Smith, or Spencer Dinwiddie. They might try to get additional draft capital because at the moment their own resources are maybe a little lower in that category. And then there's teams that have external pressure or internal pressure. I don't think it's an outright thing, but some say LeBron's being a little passive aggressive, maybe sending cryptic messages to put
No,
pressure on the Lakers.
LeBron passive aggressive? No.
and and he has a player option after this season, which is just typical LeBron stuff. But as the Lakers, especially in the case where, and I'm sorry, Corbin, because they did go to the conference finals last year, but they're a play-in team in terms of their regular season records the last several years. They're a play-in team, and they're currently a play-in team. So you have LeBron, who even at 39 is playing fantastically. You have AD, who's an all-star as well. Do you, given this internal pressure because of LeBron's player option and the somewhat cryptic messaging, do you throw your remaining draft assets and young players into a deal to try to get a little more competitive, knowing that you're probably still going to have to fight your way out of the play-in and fight your way against a top 2 seed to make it to the second round, let alone get to the finals? Do you do that? Or do you maybe, and this is obviously not going to happen. People have been talking about it, but I don't think it's going to happen. They're not going to trade LeBron unless LeBron asks them to trade him. But and even then, LeBron would have the leverage with that player option, so it's not like the Lakers would be able to get a whole lot of value for him. But like these are kind of some of the things that influence both when and how you might approach making roster changes, whether that be in the offseason or in this case, the trade deadline. Like if you have this pressure, that's going to make you more likely to want to do this or that. And then based on your competitive life cycle, that's going to make you more likely to want younger players and picks if you're a rebuilding team. If you're a contender or you're a home court or playoff team, you're probably looking for more impactful vets. And you're more willing to give up younger players or picks in order to get that. And then, if you have a ton of picks like OKC, I made this massive spreadsheet and listed like all of the resources teams have. And for OKC, I got a headache trying to list out every single first. So I just said a lot. But like if you're OKC, for instance, there's a lot of interesting dynamics in terms of when to make this decision right now because you have a very young core and you are first in the West. You're being very successful with this young core. You don't necessarily have to do anything. But you have the resources to do something, and we know, and this is hurtful, and I'm sorry for any OKC fans, but like they went to the finals. And then from then on, they just slowly lost their core players to attrition via trades and so forth. Nothing is guaranteed. So OKC doesn't have to make any decisions right now. They don't. They'll be fine if they don't. But what if Shea or Chet or J-Dub injure themselves badly this offseason? And they could have made a move, and because they have the largest treasure chest of resources, they're one of those teams that actually can potentially do a swing for the stars trade right now. There's not a lot of stars that I think are actually available. They have enough resources where they could make a Godfather offer for somebody who's unavailable and still have enough resources to make subsequent trades down the line. So like these are all these various kind of factors that influence whether a team is open to making a deal and what type of deal. And with teams like OKC, that there's so much you could potentially do, but you also don't have to do anything. And so it'll be interesting to see how teams like that approach this deadline.
Yeah, and obviously that's a great point, that the team's life cycle determining, when to go for it, when not to go for it. I also think the life cycle in terms of the individual players' contracts also plays a big factor. I think a big part of what the Knicks have done in recent trades has a lot to do with like Obi Toppin, for instance, and then also with Emmanuel Quickley. Those guys were nearing the end of their rookie contracts and are about to get paid. And New York decided, well, we could either hold on to these guys and pay them what they want, or we can try to offload them if we don't think they're quite worth what they're going to get, and try to get something in return instead. And so, yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, that's why Oklahoma City with Josh Giddey, it's going to be interesting to see what they do with him, because yeah, he'll be a restricted free agent after next season, I believe. And so he is a guy that has been rumored to be potentially on the block, because I think he's probably the worst fit amongst those core young players that Oklahoma City has, given his lack of shooting and his struggles, with one-on-one defense. But, yeah, as Josh said, with their treasure trove of assets, can they possibly move a Giddey and some of those picks to get somebody that maybe is a better fit? It'll be fascinating to see. But yeah, not only where the teams are, but then also where their individual players are and with their respective contracts, it all factors into these decisions and why these trades get done.
I want to ask another kind of going a different direction here. This kind of been referenced a few times, most notably with the Lakers. But we talk about these teams with these cycles, right? How much of that is influenced by the personnel already on the team? What I mean by that, obviously, on his head, all of it, but maybe more specifically the star personnel. We've seen this with LeBron and basically any team he's been on, but LeBron and AD on the Lakers. Like, the Lakers are probably more inclined to make a move now, not only because LeBron's age and how good he's playing, but also LeBron giving some subtle or / not so subtle signs that he is seeking a move, right? Another LA team you can reference up until this past year, where they both had to worry about their own future extensions with the Clippers. You look at Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. The different moves they've pushed, whether it was Russ last year to come over, or Rajon Rondo a couple years back, and the personnel moves that they've personally like, hey, this is what we like to see done, and the power that they've wielded over the organization to then have the organization's hand go, well, that is our better player, and that's what they've said literally up until this year they've had. And even then, they kind of advocate for James Harden, even though they were in a situation where that was more ownership than them, I feel, in the sense that they advocated for it, but they're also trying to like secure their own long-term contracts and have other things to worry about. So like
another example being Giannis and the Bucks going, and getting Dame.
I was about exactly perfect, exactly. And so that's another angle I want to talk about here. Kind of want to get your thoughts on is that yes, we have these teams in a perfect world. This is what they're already thinking based off of their own, brain trust and where we're at, but also there's other shareholders in this, right? And some have more power than others. And I kind of want to discuss that dynamic a little bit as well.
It's an interesting topic because not just we've seen and we've all discussed like player pressure before. Like, there are some players like LeBron and KD is kind of did this for a stretch of his career too, where like, I'm going to take a 2-year deal with a player option, because you have to continuously be competitive. You have to continuously reach my criteria for me to stay with you. And we've seen that kind of pressure, but we also have pressure from owners. The one of the worst deals ever, as a lot of people like to call it, where the Brooklyn Nets traded a whole bunch of unprotected firsts for, mid to late 30s KG, Paul Pierce, and Jason Terry. That was because we're moving into a new arena in a new city and we want to be competitive. The Clippers, for instance, they have prior to Kawhi's extension, they had basically the opportunity to financially at least reboot after the season if things didn't go their way, right? But they have their own arena that's going to be coming up soon. And you don't want to open a new arena with higher costs and try to get season tickets when people are like, oh, great, it's another rebuilding year. So like there's those types of pressures as well. In the past there have been pressures where there might be a threat that this team might move. And how does that impact how you approach these decisions and stuff? And then you have like Houston very clearly the ownership had gotten tired of the degree to which they were losing, right? And so let's bring in a more competitive focus. Let's hire Ime Udoka. Let's, go and get highly competitive veterans like Fred VanVleet, like I'm blanking on the name
Dylan
at the
Brooks.
Dylan Brooks. Yeah, like these guys. Let's make this move to be more competitive right now. So there's all these different, like you said, shareholders or stakeholders. Let's go with stakeholders because I don't like the term shareholders.
I like that.
Yeah. But like there are all these stakeholders that impact how you approach this thing. And there's an additional element of this that we're not necessarily going to dive into because I think all of us don't like discussing this sort of stuff because it just sucks. But like some team is going to trade for Miles Bridges. And how does your appreciation of like certain stakeholders, say members of your fan base that have experienced domestic violence, how do you factor that in versus like this guy can really help us on the court? Personally, you all know how I feel about this. But like a lot of teams, do you wrestle? Sorry. Do you wrestle with the quote PR hit and maybe alienating some of your fan base and maybe getting bad press in the media for an on-court positive? Like there's so many elements that factor into this, and some of those elements, I'm going to be honest, flat out, get totally ignored. It seems like Phoenix doesn't care whatsoever about its fans that might have their own history with domestic violence because they're apparently very interested in the front runners to get Miles Bridges. We've seen this happen time and time again with Derrick Rose. We've seen this happen with lots of players. Jackson Hayes is currently on an NBA team. Like there's so many stakeholders in basketball. You've got the ownership, front office, coaches, the players, the arena staff, the fans, the media. And that's a lot of people to try to keep happy. And so it's always interesting to see where teams maybe shade towards one type of stakeholder over others. And unfortunately, we're going to see a team not care about certain stakeholders because they want, an athletic wing who can bolster really bad depth.
Well, yeah, and like I think teams as well, like when we talk about these decisions, it's a lot more complicated than like one person like you, Josh, that is against this. Like you could be against that in an organization, but have someone that, say your owner, vetoes your opinion, your vote, and says we're doing this anyway. That happens all the time. And I think that's another thing, again, kind of going back to the whole life cycle element is I think it's important to note that you can have an internal monologue with like, your own front office and all be on the same page about like, okay, we should be sellers. We shouldn't be competing. We're like the 8th worst team in the NBA. We shouldn't be competing to try to make the play in. But you could have an ownership that says, no, I want, even if it's a 2% chance at like a single play home play-in game, I want us to go for that. Then it doesn't matter what your whole front office thinks. So that's where, again, ownership is the biggest competitive advantage in sports. Like that's where that factors in, because it's having ownership that sort of like considers, if you have an owner that is, thinks they're the smartest basketball mind in the room, or an ownership like it's the situation with the Lakers where they're one of the biggest markets and yet they don't want to spend that much money. You can have so many of these situations where your ability to make the correct move is hindered by someone above you that frankly shouldn't be making the decisions, should allow everyone to do their job, but instead chooses to get too involved.
That's really interesting about that dynamic, between ownership, their influence on it, especially when it comes to moves that are, let's just say, morally dubious. And I've taken a more, I guess, I don't want to say pragmatic look than Josh has over our years kind of discussing this in terms of like philosophy. I'm not quite as like, oh, well, if the talent fits, you got to get him. But I'm also not as like, I don't know, I guess as down, because I just don't look at the NBA as like, I don't know, the moral high ground. I try to look at like as a business, and it kind of sucks in that aspect of it. But like that's an element that they go with more often than not. And so like I'm not surprised by this move. Am I a little disheartened by it? Absolutely. And I mean, Josh put a good, comment in the chat about every business that can be more, and that's true. But unfortunately, I guess I tend to lean toward, and this is a more pessimistic view of business going for the bottom line at the end of the day. And if they can do the bottom line and also somehow have like a nice little feel good moment bent, then yes, they will do that. But more often than not, they'll just do what's best for them, right? And in this case, literally, and I hate to describe it, but with Miles Bridges looking at a guy who like not a great person. In my mind, I've watched a lot of Hornets basketball. Like it does seem like kind of like good stats, bad team type deal. But like I already see in Twitter, or X, which is not the greatest place to be, like the fan base going, some measures ever going, hey, listen, like this is horrible. We don't want him on our team. Like this is a bad look. And others going, hey, look at how much he's doing good. Like this could be a fresh start, could be great for him. As if like a fresh start's gonna change who he is and not just change where he's playing. And it's a lot. It's a lot. It's to the point now that, and I've been more of that myself, where when they talk about Miles Bridges and players of that ilk, you can mention Josh Giddey in transactions. We are purposefully, willingly looking at just the basketball side of it, because it is kind of hard to take into effect all of it. But rest assured, most teams can and will do just that.
The other element that I think is particularly interesting when it comes to trade deadline specifically is the types of trades that get made, right? Like I made a couple of different categories, but really like there are so many types of trades that you can do. You got teams that are trying to swing for the fences and get stars, but sometimes, like in this particular market, there aren't necessarily stars available. And maybe the closest one has already been traded, Pascal Siakam. So like you have that. You might maybe want like an upgrade at a particular position. You might want to solidify your depth. You might want to open up cap space or get younger or add more picks. And then the most common trades that do happen at the trade deadline, and we all just kind of mark these off because like they're not that exciting from a basketball standpoint, are ducking various tax levels. Like, yeah, for instance, the Lakers, they're about like a little over 2 million into the tax. Now, if you were to move, say, Jackson Hayes or Cam Reddish, and you'd probably have to attach a second to get their salaries off without getting salary in return. You'd be able to get out of the luxury tax, and you'd go from owing, however, like you'd be 2 million over. So depending on like the various escalators, at the bare minimum, you'd be getting that 2 million back plus like an 18 to 20 million payout this offseason as well. So like there's a lot of incentive for teams to duck the tax, especially, but also to duck the various like first and second aprons, particularly that second apron. It's so stringent on the restrictions to your roster construction abilities that if you could duck the second apron, you want to try. And there are a couple of teams that are in the second apron that just have no chance of doing, like the Clippers and the Warriors are so far into the second apron that there's no realistic way for them to get out of that. Boston, in theory, could duck it, but to do so, they'd have to move like Peyton Pritchard and someone else without returning any salary. So they'd have to give up somebody who's been helpful to their quest to contend for nothing just to duck that tax when they're focused on winning. And then you have like Milwaukee, which is an interesting case because they're only a little over 3 million above the second apron, and they could in theory duck that apron by moving like AJ Green and one of like Robin Lopez, Thanasis, or Campaign. And it'll be interesting, like, do they duck that? They don't have a whole lot of seconds left, and they'd probably have to attach one or both of their remaining seconds to do that. So you'd basically clear out your draft capital to duck that apron. But when you have a roster like the Bucks have that is so top heavy, both in terms of like talent, but also salary, with Dame, Giannis, Brooke, and Chris Middleton, you probably do have a lot of pressure to duck that second apron so that you have more ways to continue to flesh out the roster around those guys. So they might be a team, like I said, that moves an AJ Green and, one of those other guys in that particular salary bracket. And they might view that as a positive for clearing out their remaining draft capital because it helps them build around those guys further next season.
Yeah, and I think something that isn't discussed enough or like at least analyzed when trades are broken down and you've got the winners and losers and all of that is the idea that like some trades, even if the personnel shift is significant and you can say, oh, this team added a player that improved their roster, it could still maybe not be the primary motivation for the trade. The primary motivation might have been that they actually just saved some money. They just saved $18 million, their owner, because they got so much less into the tax now. So that's the other thing is when we're breaking these trades down, it's often just we focus so much on just the element of, okay, did this team get better or worse on the floor? And of course, as people that enjoy watching basketball, that is the most interesting part. But that's not necessarily the primary reason why these moves are done.
Very good point. Yes. And that's kind of why we wanted to have this particular discussion and not focus on possible trades, but on the factors that influence those decisions. Because, like we've kind of alluded to with some of these examples so far, these teams, because of where they're in the life cycle, because of their financial context, because of like their resources or lack thereof, and because of any internal and external pressures, they're all either more, less, or potentially likely to make deals before this deadline. And the types of deals are going to vary because of those various contexts. And in some ways, it's less fun to think of these other types of trades. Like, it's less fun to think like Milwaukee is going to take their last remaining seconds to duck the second apron, um, and not really add talent to a team that's trying to contend this season. That's not fun. That's not sexy, but it's probably what's in their best interest to continue building around that core next season with less restrictions from being above that second apron. Um, it's probably not all that sexy that Utah potentially might just help others duck the tax and not move off a bunch of their guys and get even more picks. Although it's Danny, so Danny always loves picks. So they could kind of go either way because they have that kind of interesting, flexible context right now. They're rebuilding while still being kind of competitive, and they have cap space. They have a bunch of their own picks, and they have good players on pretty good contracts. So like they could kind of go in any which way, which makes them kind of a skeleton key for other teams, I think, when it comes to this trade deadline.
And the Clippers are an interesting team too, because you brought up, Josh, that they're, along with the Warriors, so far into the or past the second apron. But even still, cost-cutting moves make sense for them. Like, for instance, PJ Tucker on his expiring deal, if they were to, for instance, offload him into another team's trade exception and not take any money back, that might save them. I don't have the exact number, but like something like $40 million. Josh, do you have that exact number?
I don't off the top of my head, but I would say that's another example, right, of like that's not a sexy trade to talk about with your friends at the proverbial water cooler. Like, ooh, they dumped PJ Tucker. Like, and personally, I'm not a big fan of caring that much about like cutting the bill for billionaires. Like, I don't
I
really
feel that.
care in
Yeah.
that regard. But like that, this is value. Garrett's bringing up something that does matter to NBA teams, especially when you're as far into the tax as teams like the Clippers are. This isn't just like that particular player's salary. This is multiples of that particular player's salary. And while it might not impact their ability to make other moves, by cutting salary in such a way, you also do a positive for the ownership, which can sometimes give you more goodwill to go to them down the line and say, hey, I saved you $40 million with this deal. Do you have some leeway so that we can make this other deal that we're trying to accomplish right now?
Yeah, and that what you just said was is a great point, because as you said, like, yeah, the Clippers getting rid of PJ Tucker actually probably hurts them a little bit, even though he hasn't really been in the rotation. Like, there are theoretical matchups where PJ Tucker could possibly help them. But in the grand scheme of things, if Ty Lue says, he's just not enough of an offensive threat, I'm not going to play this guy, or I'm unlikely to play this guy, and we can offload that salary and also, yeah, save Steve Ballmer $40 million. There's probably discussions happening where Ballmer might go to the GM and say, hey, if you can save me this money now, I might be willing to spend in excess some more money next season, right? So those are the kind of decisions you also have to make. And again, that goes also back to the timelines. It's like, okay, does it benefit us that we can get a little bit of extra cash at our disposal next year compared to this year?
Helps get some more toilets in a new arena. I think that's something to point out too. But you're right, the financial aspect of it. Y'all know about this, but I love my video game basketball GM, right? And a lot of it is like, making the trades to make the team to win. But what I love and hate about the game is the financial part of it. Like, you do kind of got to reach the bottom line. And if you have like, a winning team and your tax is through the roof, you're going to get some hot water for that. And that's a thing in general. Like, you may not get fired for that, like you might in the game, but like even in real life, like you can have a winning team and it's good, but there's only so much that any ownership will take in terms of you winning with just a catastrophic tax bill before moves have to be made. We've seen it with the Cavs. We've seen it with the Warriors. At some point in time, yeah, there is a limit to a owner's patience, whether that is financially or otherwise. And that's something to take into account as well, that even as you are building this contending team, this championship team, and yes, the goal is to win, but let's be real, it's to win at a certain price point. And if it is to exceed that price point, then that can only be for a limited amount of time. So that is something that people lose track of all the time in terms, and myself included, in terms of evaluating trades. It's like, well, actually, that's something you really should consider because it is a major component in team building.
And some ownership, some owners will, I think Denver is a good example of this, where when they were kind of, maybe a first round playoff team or second round playoff team, not like the true contenders that they are now, I think they were pretty insistent on avoiding the tax, right? And now, and similar with like Milwaukee as well, where even early in the Giannis era, they were pretty consistently making tax avoidance moves. And now, as these teams have won championships and have proven that they, are competing at the highest of levels and are in that top tier of the franchise life cycle, now those ownership groups are willing to pay. But, that's not also a permanent thing. Maybe a year or two down the line, that might change. And as the front office, you have to consistently be able to, kind of go with the flow and make adjustments as time moves on.
I just wanted to chime in with a fun Denver Nuggets thing. Do you guys remember when they traded Marcus Camby to the Clippers at the deadline for a top 55 protected second?
I'd forgotten about that.
Do you guys remember that? So that was an interesting deal. One, because it was, and Camby was really good. He had recently won Depoy. I don't think it was the year before. It might have been, but like, it was an addition by subtraction because they wanted to get more minutes for Nene. So like you clear more minutes. On top of it, it helped the team get under the salary cap actually at the time. And so ownership was able to say like, hey, look, we made the playoffs and under budget. And that's something that makes ownership very happy. And that's something that's a feather that you could put in your GM cap that helps out. And then the second reason that's interesting, this is a total tangent, is that was the creation of the top 55 protected. They originally wanted to say top 59 protected. And the NBA was like, come on, guys. Like, no, come on. And so that's why the most you can protect a pick is like top 55 protected.
That's pretty neat. I love that little nugget of history. Haha, get it? Yeah, thank you.
But that's another thing we should probably discuss a little bit is like, some of these trades that don't end up happening. A lot of times it might be haggling over protections now. I think that's a large part of the sort of the last portion of getting these deals done is these teams saying, okay, I'd like to protect this, this pick with, top 14, like lottery protect it. And the other team would be like, no, I want it top 3. And then you go, oh, what about top 10? Or what about top 6? And you've got this back and forth. And sometimes the two sides aren't able to bridge that gap, and then we never hear about the trade. And other times they're able to figure it out. But I feel like, if you're talking about trades 30 years ago, that was not as big of a complication or complication really at all. And now that is something that scuttles some of these deals.
I mean, we've seen that with crazy trades in NBA history, right? Like how the Lakers were able to get Magic Johnson in a trade that involved journeyman forward Don Ford years ago, or how they were able to luck into the first overall pick in '82 for James Worthy, or an Otis Thorpe trade with the Vancouver Grizzlies back in '99 yielded LeBron James, in that play. They were in play for LeBron James 5 years later. Like, you're right. Like, back in the day, to the detriment of some franchises, these picks were, yeah, whatever, we'll put them in. And then you see the benefits or the weaknesses of that years down the line.
For instance, Brooklyn being like, we only like 3 players in this draft, so we're only going to do top X protected, and then the pick winds up becoming Dame. Like,
Yikes.
yeah, or the Clippers, they did a deal
Baron
with the
Davis,
Cavs, with the Cavs,
Mo, yeah,
to
Mo
get
Williams.
Baron Davis's contract off the books, even though we knew there was a new CBA coming in that was likely going to have an Allen Houston rule, which oddly enough was never used on Allen Houston. But they could have used that on Baron Davis and kept the pick, and that pick was not protected, and it wound up and it was supposed to be around like 11th or 12th, I think, but it jumped all the way to the first. So like, uh, and nowadays, I mentioned that I did a whole lot of spreadsheeting, and Garrett and Corbett can
Yeah,
kind
you
of
did.
attest. Like, it's a lot to look at,
There's so much
and I
data.
didn't do anything under the resource section of the Thunder, in large part because the Thunder have like so many conditions on all these different picks of like, well, you get the best, the most favorable of this if it falls within this range, or the less favorable of these options if they fall in these ranges. And that's something I think that's interesting that I've seen lately is you might see the same pick traded to 2 different teams where it goes to team A if it falls within this range, and it goes to team B if it falls within this range.
Yeah,
And that's
that
one of
happened
those
with
like
that.
loopholes.
That
Yeah, yeah,
happened with that Jeremy Grant trade, right?
yeah.
With Portland and New Orleans, and it was going to go to Portland, but then it ended up going to New Orleans, and then Portland got a different pick because
Yep.
I think the Milwaukee 2025 pick, and that's the pick I think they sent to get then Jeremy Grant. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting things, and yeah, like with swaps as well. That's another super complicated thing. Yeah, if a team has 4 picks in a certain draft, you could say you can get the second least favorable swap out of these 4, and it's like you can understand why a lot of these trades come in as just the basics, and it takes hours and sometimes days for these full details to come out because it can get very complicated very quickly.
There were a few that were like, because OKC has so many future firsts, there were several that were like OKC gets the 2 best or the 3 best out of these potential picks in this draft class, and then the lesser 2 or 1 of those same picks goes to this team. And like, it is interesting that I think teams have gotten really creative when it comes to pick swaps, when it comes to protections, to better utilize draft picks and draft capital to make deals, as we kind of see picks become in some ways more valuable to teams, as salaries keep going up because of the basketball income keeps going up. Having those low cost salaries on the books, and having control for, in theory, the first 7 seasons of a player's um, career, like those continue to go up. And so teams are getting more creative in doing it, while simultaneously other teams are just like, take all of our firsts. We want that star player. So it's like a very interesting, like, marketplace, if you will, where some teams are just like, give me whatever piece of that pick I can have. And then other teams are just like, take everything you want. We want Bradley Beal.
Yeah, and I think like speaking to Oklahoma City, you mentioned all of the picks that they have, and we've seen some moves that they've made. The basic strategy is like we just don't want five rookies in the same draft class because we can't develop five rookies. We don't have the roster spots for five rookies, right? So we'll maybe make a trade that isn't necessarily like getting positive value, but we'll just trade some pick so that we can get a future pick down the line. So then we can kind of push those roster spot and those pick issues, to a later date. And then also you see a team like Denver, who I talked about earlier, they are now in the tax and they don't have a lot of ways to add to their current roster talent wise. So in the last couple of drafts, they've gone out of their way to add extra picks and also picks that are kind of late first, early second, to where the salaries of those players are a little bit lower so they can have some potential cheap contributors on a championship level team that they couldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, and that has even influenced their draft philosophy with those picks of, because our window is right now and we need to have helpful players in the rotation on those lower salaries, we're going to target more ready to contribute right now players over, say, players with a higher potential ceiling. And then the other thing with OKC, not only does that treasure chest of picks allow them to kind of like, okay, well, we can keep kicking this can down the road and constantly have future firsts, but it allows them to, and I think they've done this consistently. Like they moved up for Usman Jang. I forget if they moved up for J Dub or not, but like,
I think they moved up to get back-to-back picks in which
yes, yeah, and then
Williams. So
they moved up
there's
for
an argument
Kaysen.
that they moved up to get Williams even though they took Jang first.
Yes. That they also moved up to get Kaysen. And so these extra picks can also, like Garrett said, no team is bringing, unless you're an expansion team, and even then you probably don't want to bring in five rookies. It's just a lot to try to develop that many players at the same time. But like Garrett said, you can kick them down the line, and you can also use them as fodder to move up to get your guy. Which is why I think you see OKC, you see Utah, you see teams like that who are trying to, I wouldn't say hoard their picks, but they're also not necessarily eagerly trying to swing hard for the fences on any fastball that might be a star. Like they're holding until they find the star they want to make like a big swing, or they're using those picks, like we said, to kind of perpetuate the treasure chest or to move up in the draft to get specific players they want.
I do want to ask a question. We're talking about draft picks. I think it's interesting. Do we, this is more of a subjective question for y'all, but do y'all think that we value draft picks too high almost? I feel like we talk about Oklahoma City and the treasure trove of draft picks that they have. It almost reminds me 10 years ago, we were talking the same thing about Boston, right? And all the picks they had. And while they yielded some talent, look what mostly they did, right? Or Miami or other teams, well, Miami didn't have a lot of draft picks, but like other teams that like were doing the same sort of style pound. Oh, look what could happen. They have all this. I think one that I like to laugh about a lot is the Lakers Pelicans, right? That big trade with all the draft picks of Anthony Davis. Not a whole lot of notes come from that, of those picks. And in the grand scheme of things, for everything that happened, I think the most dramatic was last season. I want to say the season before, last season. I think where it was like, oh, the Lakers could the Pelicans can make the playoffs, be a high seed, and get like a high pick because the Lakers are so bad. And then we saw how things end up working themselves out. But like, do we value them almost too high? Like, we definitely get the logistical aspects of it, the team building side of that, what makes sense when it pertains to that in terms of being able to, have cheap talent, cost controlled, long term, and the ability to kind of keep augmenting your team with that and having the flexibility that the picks give you, whether that's in trades or otherwise, other cap flexibility situations. But do we think it gets to a point where it's like, okay, that's like, okay, you have them, but you're not going to roster all of the players that these picks ultimately will become? So what does that turn into? And how do you end up, swinging 4-for-1 trades at the deadline, or whatever the case may be? Like, that's more of what I'm curious about, because I do think maybe we seem to go back and forth on the pendulum of, okay, that's too much, not too much, that's a lot, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's largely dependent on context. I think like depending on your market, if you're a team like the Miami Heat that is able to draw in free agents, maybe having a bunch of excess draft picks isn't as valuable for them. But a smaller market, right, that isn't able to produce much in free agency, you do kind of have to build your team through the draft and through draft picks. And so I do think it's largely context based. And then also I think one thing where I do have an issue with teams overvaluing draft assets is when the protections are so strong on the pick that the upside of the pick is just not there, right? If it's just consistently top 14 protected for, the entire time and then becomes seconds, and the team you're trading with is just bad, like, you may never get that pick. And so you shouldn't then value that pick like a pick that you're guaranteed to get, or that if you make the trade right before the draft, the exact pick you're getting. So that's where I think, again, based on context, I think sometimes teams overvalue the picks that they're getting, but oftentimes I do think draft picks are how a lot of these smaller market teams can either, build up a homegrown group of young players, or trading for guys that they couldn't get in free agency because players wouldn't actively choose to go to that location.
Yeah, and sometimes I think it's not even just like, are we a free agent destination type thing, but like if we're a smaller market and we maybe don't have the type of revenue generation that some bigger markets have, we might necessarily need to emphasize the draft, because those are lower cost contracts. We know what those contracts are going to be. Additionally, like I think with Miami, for instance, there's an interesting context there where they're so good at identifying undrafted free agents that they maybe don't value draft picks as much as some other teams might. I think the problem I have, um, with draft picks, and I have a complicated relationship with draft picks, as you two know, is I think a lot of it is actually the media and the fans actually overvalue picks more than teams do, because a lot of these teams, they're viewing it more as options in the future. Like this should be helpful down the line, in the sense like we were talking about OKC. Even if like the only value we get out of this is we can continuously kick this first into a future first, and like we'll always have an additional first. If that's the worst thing, that's helpful to have as a front office, right? Um, but I think what becomes a problem is when the media and the fans are just like when a trade is announced. Or I always like to use because we've talked about our boy Danny before in this pod already. I always love to use Danny Ainge trying to save face when he couldn't trade up for the 10th pick to get Justice Winslow. I offered them four firsts. All of those firsts were in the 20s, dude. Like every single one of those firsts was likely to be in the 20s for a top 10 pick. Like, not all firsts are equal. So you hear these like, oh, well, this team offered like 4 firsts for OG Anunoby. Well, maybe those firsts sucked. Like maybe there's a reason Toronto turned it down. And the other thing is you never know for sure, particularly with future first. Like I'm cautious when it comes to future first. Like Garrett said, when it's like this upcoming draft, you have a much better sense of how this might play out. Like what range is this pick likely to be in? That's much clearer than like even 2 seasons out, let alone like 5 years down the line. Here's this pick. Um, and a lot of teams, whatever, will roll with the risk. But like Danny, again, sorry Danny, but like Danny made that deal with the Lakers where he got that 2027 first that's top 4 protected, and then if it is in the top 4, you get a second. Like, and he gave up 3 of his top 7 players in that deal for a pick that's likely not going to be that valuable. It's likely at best going to be a 5th pick, and you have no idea what that draft class necessarily is going to be in terms of quality, because you could get an unprotected first and you could land in a draft class like 2000. Like you might get the first pick, but it doesn't guarantee that it's a good class. um, and also, my late great friend Mark Warkentine always used to tell me whenever like these trades would get announced and everybody'd be so excited, oh, they got 3 future firsts. Mark would always be like, hey, check the box score. How many rebounds did future first get? How many points did he score?
That's a classic.
Nothing. Nothing. Oh, right, because it's nothing until it's actually used. So, I think picks obviously have a lot of value. They're obviously very helpful, but I think particularly for fans in the media, we highly overvalue picks because we don't provide that additional context. We don't say these picks are likely, bottom third of the first round. Like they're not likely good picks in theory. Instead, we're just like, oh, they got 3 picks. Or even when we talk about these deals, like Portland has all of like Milwaukee's picks now. Like Portland and New Orleans have like all of Milwaukee's picks, but like Giannis extended. They have Dame now on several year contract. Like unless something really goes bad, that team is not going to be a lotto team. They might not remain a contender, but they're not going to be a lotto team. So how, like, yes, you got X number of picks, but how good are those picks? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue though that like speaking to the future Milwaukee picks, right? Like Dame, Middleton, Lopez, a ton of their core is in their early to mid 30s, right? And yes, I agree that if Giannis is healthy at all, yeah, they're going to be a playoff team. But say Giannis suffers an injury, and this is 2 years from now, that could be a lotto pick. It's possible. I mean, yeah, it's
It's a
unlikely.
very, very big if, though.
Yes.
And like these deals get pitched as like, oh no, it's a great deal because like that 2027 Lakers pick, right? Like there was so much discussion of like, oh, that's a great pick. Is it? Like again, at best you're getting the 5th pick, or if you really think the Lakers are going to be bad because say LeBron leaves and AD just continuously gets injured, because that's kind of, sorry, Corbin. But like if that is the case, are you certain that the Lakers are going to be like not a bottom 4 team necessarily? And if they are a bottom 4 team, then you just got a second for dealing 3 of your top rotation players. Like a lot of it also comes down to risk aversion. Like these front offices, the ownership, and to some extent the coaches, like the key stakeholders in the player personnel decision making process. How risk averse are these people? And like, are you willing to swing and be like, actually, we want your 2028 your 2030 picks, because like we feel like that could be good down the line, but we have zero clue how those, like, you can't even really assign a value to them, because like yes, that could in theory be the first overall pick, but it also could be the 30th pick and any pick in between, unless you have very clear like protections on them. So like I think where we fall prey to overvaluing firsts is when we don't factor in the context of like, yeah, but we have no idea how far out. Or like, yeah, but unless Giannis gets injured, that's not a lotto pick. Yeah, but this team is going to be really good over these years. Like I think the Brooklyn Phoenix deal was interesting because KD has been injured recently, and the Suns have no depth. And like, if KD were to leave, or like Bradley Beal remains injured, and they're not able because of their finances to actually, you know, be competitive when those guys are out, those picks do become interesting. But it's still a risk. It's still a guess. And I think sometimes we get so focused on like, oh, that's a future first. That's cool. That's awesome. That's hope. It could be. It could be so many things. Yeah, but it's likely these things. And
Yeah.
we never actually get into the, yeah, but it's likely this.
Well, yeah, and I think I can safely say, Josh, we both disliked that trade you referenced earlier that Danny Ainge made. Trading, what was it, Conley, Beasley, Vanderbilt, and getting that top four protected pick. In part because I think we would have, if we were in Danny Ainge's shoes, we would have been a little bit more strict on that protection and said, well, we're not doing this deal if it's top four protected. Like, maybe we would consider it if it's top one or two, but top four is too much, because that's the whole, ping pong balls. That's, if the Lakers end that season, or the prior season, with one of the four worst records, that's what, like a 48 to 52% chance that they don't get that pick and it becomes a second. So yeah, that to me is too much of a risk, and that's where those final portions of the negotiations, it would be fascinating. It would be really fun, I think, to be a fly on the wall and see those negotiations broken down, because I'm sure there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of side chats happening. And again, it's getting more and more complicated with what teams are coming up with to protect their picks and to protect their swaps and all of that. But yeah, it's a really interesting element to this whole trade deadline bonanza.
And I think another additional element to this, and just like trades and trade deadline, is not even like a risk thing, but how much does how much do those key decision makers care about backlash, potential backlash? Like, how much do they care? Like, how much did Masai Ujiri care if Kawhi left after the year? Like, Masai clearly was like, I'm going to do it. Most people would not do that. Most people, and this was something Mark used to say a lot too, is most people want to win the press conference. Very much like the fans and like the media, they want to win the deal. They want the media and the fans to be excited about the decision they just made, because they think it's a good decision, because otherwise, why would you do that decision? And so a lot of them maybe don't want to, quote, look bad, which is why you see these pick protections, which is why you see we talked about Brooklyn earlier. Oh, Brooklyn can't take a step back competitively because they don't own their own pick. That's not true at all. It just means their pick might look better for another team and you might be a little embarrassed. Who cares? You already did the deal. Like that pick is not yours anymore. So like I think part of it also comes down to how much do you have like an aversion to negative feedback versus like how much are you confident in like, yeah, this is the right decision for us and we're going to live with it.
Yeah, and that going back to that Kawhi Leonard trade, I think that one is so fascinating because in hindsight, looking back on it, it actually wasn't that risky. The biggest risk I would say was the PR element of trading a fan favorite in DeRozan, right? But not only did they, I think, accurately understand, okay, we're not in the contender category as it currently stands, but if we get a top 5 player in Kawhi, we get into that level. But then also, if Kawhi leaves in the offseason, which ended up happening, they were still about a similar level of team that they were before the trade. So I think there was, not only the element of understanding, okay, we need this type of player to get to where we want to go, but also what's the downside and how worse is it than our current position? And I think they correctly assessed both of those things making that deal.
I definitely think, wow, this has been pretty far-reaching and really contextual conversation. As we kind of wind it down more to a close, do we have any like final kind of overarching thoughts? Anything we want to kind of dive into in a little more detail here? I feel like it's been a really, really good conversation. And something we could easily maybe do an addendum. I think that's the word for it. Post trade deadline, with what we have discussed now and what we see after the deadline and more of an overarching view. But I do want to open up just if we have any last kind of comments here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like one of the things that I think we spent most of this episode avoiding the subject of like stuff we're interested in seeing happen, but I think that this could be a fun little just thing right at the end maybe to bring up. And I know Corban, you have some thoughts on your Lakers and some of the rumors that they've been involved in, but yeah, I would like to see a few teams maybe make some additional moves. Like I'm always all about like if you're in that category, what we discussed, like the 5% category, right? I think that is a time to make a move. And Philadelphia is an interesting study here because with the Joel Embiid recent injury and also Daryl Morey's history of not making those mid-tier moves, I think it's much more likely that they're kind of quiet now because of the Embiid injury than before. Whereas I would have been fascinated to see if Embiid was healthy going into this deadline. Like, yeah, why don't you use one of your assets to improve your 4th or 5th man on this team? Because like you're right there as Philadelphia. You are in that 5% class. You are, I think, in that contender category. And yeah, Josh is bringing up in the chat, get Alex Caruso. And I think that would be a perfect fit because not only does he help the team now, but his salary is so low that next season he'd be a guy that would not hurt their cap space dreams as well. So, yeah, I love seeing the trades that I'm most interested in come the deadline are those ones where you've got a team that maybe as currently constructed is not quite good enough, but like the 2019 Raptors going and getting Marc Gasol, right? Making that final little push for maybe not necessarily a top 1 or 2 guy, but getting another quality starter in that just puts you over the top.
There are a couple that I'm like intrigued by for example, like Minnesota, I currently have them listed as the home court life cycle stage. I don't necessarily consider them a contender just yet. Um, and part of that, I think, is they still need a solidify trade. They still need like an additional element. Particularly, they need 3-point volume. Like they don't shoot a lot of threes. They're 25th in the league in shooting threes. They don't really have that person on the roster who like strikes fear in opponents for leaving them open. And there are a couple of those guys that I think are potentially available. Like Buddy Hield's probably available. Luke Kennard is probably available. If you don't want to like make a significant move, you could try to take a flyer on Lonnie Walker, who's been shooting very well from Brooklyn. Shout out to Corbin. I know Lonnie's one of his guys. So that's interesting. I'm really interested to like if I were Sam Presti, for instance, I'm calling up Danny and I'm saying, what would it take to get Lauri Markkanen? Because Lauri Markkanen fits the timeline with Shea. He's only a year older than Shea. He gives him an additional big who can help with the rebounding. His skill set is almost primarily off ball, so he doesn't impede on the development of Shea and J Dub. And like I said, you have so many assets that you could probably offer a Godfather offer and still be able to trump most other teams' offers for subsequent deals. And then the other thing I'm interested in is I want to see some teams build out their depth because I think there's a lot of good playoff caliber rotation players who are going to be available or are reasonably available. Like Washington alone has Tyus Jones, Daniel Gafford, Daylon Wright, Corey Kispert. All of those guys, I think, could play good rotation minutes in the playoffs. And you could probably get them relatively inexpensively. I also think like Memphis has John Conchar and Xavier Tillman, who maybe don't profile as particularly interesting players, but they do so much for your team that are positive, especially on the defensive end, that those are the type of guys that you add to a bench for a team like a Minnesota or a team like a Philly or something like that, where it can be a really big multiplier effect, even if it's not a sexy move itself. So I'm interested to see if any teams kind of bolstered their depth with those types of guys. But mostly I want to see if Sam pushes his chips into the pot and places a Godfather offer for somebody like a Lowry. I don't think he actually will, but I think, and it's funny because Garrett and I kind of mentioned that we're maybe a little more risk averse than some of these GMs. I think that's a move I would do. I think I would like let's go for it. Let's add the finisher. It's probably going to take a pretty penny because Danny loves to charge a pretty penny, but we can actually afford it.
And it's also that sort of a move. Yes, you're going for it, but you're also able to then go for it for multiple seasons. It's not a one-off
exactly.
like that Kawhi trade.
Exactly.
So that's where like, yeah, if you're gonna throw that Godfather offer in, it might as well be for a guy that can help you not only right now, which, yeah, I agree. If they got Lauri Markkanen and replaced Josh Giddey with him, they're immediately in that championship or like, they're at very minimum
they're a contender
category. And then, not just this year, but for the next 4 or 5 years, presuming like those guys stay healthy and continue to improve.
Yeah, I'm definitely just curious on teams that are on the bubble, whether that's the bubble of another level of contention, whether that's just marginally better. Like you said, like what do the Knicks do, right? That's what I'm concerned about. I'm not concerned about. I'm curious about. That's the word. Looking at where they stand right now, they can potentially move up in another tier in the Eastern Conference. So they make them championship contenders, depending on how you look at them, depending on how they look at themselves, right? What do the Lakers do? I am against the Lakers making a move because I don't think any move out there available right now definitely pushes them up a level. Like, I still think their weakness is the Denver Nuggets. I don't see anything out in the marketplace that helps them figure that out for sure.
If AD can't figure out Jokic, there's nothing on the market that's going to help you figure out Jokic.
Yeah, and Andre Drummond coming back will not do the trick. I just want to put that out there, right? So, like, I don't know. I think that just moving things around, I get why, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, and we can talk a little bit more in our next installment here. Is like, I get why the Lakers would want to move D'Angelo Russell. I think it was talked about Jovan Buha brought up, but basically between him and Austin Reeves, the Lakers have team control on Austin Reeves, and they do not have control of D'Angelo Russell. Like, after this season's a player option. If he plays really good, he's gonna opt out anyway. If he plays really bad, now you have a bad contract. So, like, that's why. But personally, I'd rather keep this team as it is for this year and just go in the offseason, because guess what? LeBron at this point could bounce. It's very possible this upcoming season, right? You might have to keep that 2029 as a way to refresh and possibly bring in another guy alongside AD and use that as a sweetener and see where that goes. Like, there's a lot right now coming down the horizon that I don't know. I think the Lakers should be more mindful of. So that is why I'd rather keep this team here as is. If they make a big run, they're going to make it with this team. If they're not, then we kind of already knew it, right? And then other teams, like you said, I definitely looking forward to what the Wolves do. Looking forward to the Hornets, actually, because they're a team that new ownership hasn't really made a dent yet in the team yet, but they moved on a longtime franchise player in Terry Rozier. We'll see what they do with guys like Gordon Hayward. We'll see what they do with guys like Miles Bridges, who I think they probably want a fresh start from. I think that's the only time I can use fresh start on Miles Bridges and actually like make sense there. But we'll see what happens there, right? Whether or not they trade Kyle Lowry. I actually like if Kyle Lowry's a buyout guy. Does he go to the Lakers, which has been talked about? Does he go to Minnesota, which will be interesting? Like, that, does he go to Philly? You know what I mean? Like, those are kind of the things I'm definitely looking at. And also, like, I honestly, ironically, can't wait to hear we almost had this guy after the trade deadline. It's kind of a nice little feature for me.
Yep, Danny.
Absolutely. All right, y'all. Well, this has been a blast of a show, as it always is. I love getting together with y'all and having these really deep, insightful conversations. So thank y'all again for just taking the time, really breaking this down and going into detail on some real contextual conversations here concerning the NBA trade deadline, attacking it from a different lens than you've probably heard it before, and not before in your life, but just before in this trade deadline season. So definitely hope that you've enjoyed this. But gentlemen, please share where people can find you, your work, where you be at, what you be doing, all the things.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Garrett Bugay. That's GarrettBugay. You can also check out my podcast, which these two guys are on pretty frequently, Duncan Dynasty, Dunkin Dynasty. And then, you can check in my pinned tweets. I always underestimate how long it's going to take me to do it, but I'm working on the 2023 movie list and should have that out shortly. Also already did my 2023 year in music, and that is my pinned tweet on my profile, so you can check that out and check out all the stuff on my blog. But yeah, outside of that, just happy to be with you guys. Enjoy it as always. It's always a pleasure.
It's always a joy running the three-man weave with you guys. Our own little version of Run TMC. It's a blast. It keeps me up late, which my wife, we have a 1-year-old. My wife's always like, "But you're asleep." I'm like, "Yeah, but this is how I get to hang out with my buddies." So this is always a blast. I always appreciate being involved in these discussions. I am a basketball career development coach, which means I help people who work in the industry or who want to work in the industry figure out strategies and processes and just overall improve their odds of taking that next step towards their dream job in basketball. So if that sounds like you, and you want to learn a little bit more and see how I might be able to help you, you can reach me at josh@myhoopscareer.com, and we'll schedule a call. It's a totally free call. I've done one with Corban. I've done one with Garrett. I've done one with several people. And we'll go over what you're trying to accomplish, what you've already done. And in that call, I will try to help you just in that first free call come up with the very next thing you should do. And then I also offer mentorship services for those who want more of a continued experience like that and want to get actionable feedback on what they're doing. So if that sounds interesting to you, like I said, you can reach me at josh@myhoopscareer.com. You're
Thank you,
muted,
Garrett.
Corbin.
Yep, I appreciate that. I was talking like, wait, what? And then Garrett said it, and then Josh spelled it out. So thank you, because I mean myself at least on every show. It's hilarious. I was just saying basically, like, check out Josh's work. Check it out for yourself. We like he mentioned, both Garrett and I benefited from the call. I actually want to talk about resuming just more of conversation moving forward, because Josh really does open up your mind in a different way in terms of how to approach coverage and being consistent and ideas you haven't thought about in terms of advancing your career there. And kind of, let's be real, it's pretty rough out there, right? It's trying to find your niche and succeed in that, especially if that's something you're interested in. There's no joke. It's definitely not the field of dreams. It's the field of dreams. There you go. It's maybe not the field of actualized dreams, but if you talk with Josh, he will definitely help you find a much more realistic path of trying to carve out that. And that's just something I can't recommend enough. So definitely. And then between Garrett, come on now. I mean, his work speaks for himself. His podcast speaks for himself. Still waiting for the movie list so I can hear all about Godzilla -1, which just ended its theatrical release this past week. And I'm very sad, although I have to announce, not this is big news, but Amazon will be picking it up. So it will be on Amazon Prime soon. So I'm very happy for that. Closest I'll get to quote unquote owning it. But that movie was incredible. But yeah. Anyways, Garrett, man of many talents. Josh, man of many talents. I have a few myself, but the three of us, we make the Unholy Three, we make roster reconstruction. We appreciate y'all taking the time to tune in and listen. And that'll do it here for us on this show. So for Josh, for Garrett, for myself, we are Frosty. Y'all stay frosty, and we'll talk to y'all real soon.